January 24, 1963, Detroit, Michigan. Pontiac zone managers across the country opened a note from corporate. It said the Superduty program was over, immediately. All development stopped. All factory support ended. Mac McKellar, one of the engineers who built the engine, later said that word came down from above. Anyone caught violating the order would be terminated without question. 88 Superduty 421 engines had made it out the door before that note arrived. Then the door closed. What happened next is the part nobody taught you. Go back to 1957. Pontiac was a footnote. Conservative family cars, soft suspensions, chrome trim on everything. The kind of car your grandfather bought because it was sensible and he did not ask questions. When Bunky Knudsen arrived as general manager that year, he had a different idea. He wanted Pontiac to race. What followed was one of the most complete brand rebuilds Detroit ever pulled off. Pontiac dropped 4 inches of height off their cars. They moved the engine back toward the firewall for better weight distribution. They hired engineers who understood racing and gave them a budget to match. And they started building an engine that had no business being offered at a Pontiac dealership. By 1961, Pontiac won 30 of 52 NASCAR races. They were dominating the drag strip. The brand that nobody wanted in '56 had become the performance division of General Motors in less than 5 years. Then, GM noticed. The Superduty 421 was not subtle. 421 cubic inches, 4-bolt main bearing caps, forged steel connecting rods and crankshaft, Mickey Thompson forged aluminum pistons, the McKellar No. 10 solid lifter camshaft, 2 4-barrel carburetors on a high-flow aluminum intake manifold, 11-to-1 compression running through heads Pontiac internally called NASCAR spec. Official factory rating, 405 horsepower. Actual output, closer to 465. Pontiac listed it as a dealer option on the Catalina in Grand Prix. The price in 1962 was $2,250. A base Catalina stickered at $2,725. You were paying nearly as much for the engine option as you were for the rest of the car. This was not a vehicle anyone bought to drive to the grocery store. The NHRA knew it. The sanctioning body kept revising its rulebook, trying to contain it. Pontiac revised the engine to comply, then went faster anyway. Here's what makes this story different from a standard corporate ban. Pontiac was not just fighting General Motors, they were fighting the sanctioning bodies at the same time. In 1962, the NHRA revised its rules for certain stock classes. Parts had to have a factory part number, and they had to be factory installed, not just available over the counter, factory installed. Pontiac's response was to officially list the Superduty 421 as a production option, installed at the factory, with a part number. Done. So the NHRA changed the rules again. Pontiac went lighter. They started drilling holes in the frame. About 130 holes punched through the structural rails of the car, cutting into the chassis to strip out every possible pound. Aluminum replaced the front fenders, the hood, the bumpers. Sound deadening out. Body sealers out. Spare tire out. The racing community called them the Swiss cheese Catalinas. 14 were built before the corporate ban made the whole conversation irrelevant. The most famous came out of Packer Pontiac in Detroit. Howard Masells drove it to a 12.27 elapsed time at 114 miles per hour at the NHRA Nationals. C-Stock class record. Stood for years. When Pontiac's engineers finally heard that the corporate order was coming, they spent Christmas of 1962 building 6 Superduty Tempest Le Mans coupes and 6 Superduty Tempest wagons at the Pontiac assembly plant, getting hardware out the door before anyone could stop them. The order arrived January 24th anyway. Here is where the story gets complicated. In late December of 1961, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy announced plans to file antitrust suit against General Motors. GM controlled roughly 50% of the American car market. Kennedy's Justice Department had been building a case for 2 years. The stated goal was to force GM to divest all but one of its vehicle divisions. General Motors was the largest corporation in the world. The federal government wanted to break it into pieces. The direct connection between that investigation and the January racing ban is not a clean causal line. The order that came down on January 24th did not come from Kennedy's office. It came from GM Chairman Frederick Donner, reaffirming the company's position within the AMA No Racing Agreement of 1957. But Mac McKellar said it plainly: word came down from above. Drop everything. Violate the order, and you are fired. A company facing potential federal breakup did not need its racing divisions winning on the front page of every sports section. GM had spent years officially claiming it did not support racing, while quietly doing exactly that. The antitrust investigation made that arrangement impossible to maintain. Whether Kennedy caused the ban or simply made it inevitable is a question the documents do not cleanly answer. What the documents do answer is what Pontiac's engineers did the moment the order came. They did not stop. GM had a standing internal rule: 10 pounds of vehicle curb weight per cubic inch of engine displacement. A 421 cubic inch engine required a car weighing over 4,200 pounds. That ruled out any big block in a mid-size body. Pontiac's engineers read the rule carefully. It applied to base engine offerings, not option packages. They took the performance components they had developed during the Superduty program, adapted them into a 389 cubic inch block to stay under the weight threshold, dropped the package into the mid-size Tempest Le Mans as an add-on option. Then they handed the project to John DeLorean. DeLorean was 37 years old. He had come up through Pontiac engineering and understood exactly what the Superduty program had built. His job was to get the GTO past GM Corporate, which had already looked at the concept and said no. DeLorean and Pontiac general manager Pete Estes launched it anyway. They called it a pilot program, limited production, just enough to test the market. If GM Corporate wanted to pull it, they could, but they would have to do it after the car was already in showrooms. The price was $295 over the base Le Mans, 325 horsepower standard, 348 with the tri-power 3-carburetor option. They called it the GTO. GM Corporate reviewed the pilot and allowed it to continue. 1964, 32,450 GTOs sold in year 1, against an internal projection of 5,000. The government had tried to end Pontiac's performance program. Pontiac's engineers found a loophole. John DeLorean drove it through. The Superduty 421 never came back. 88 engines in 1963 before the ban. A total of somewhere between 180 and 200 factory-installed Superduty cars across 1962 and 63 combined. The Swiss cheese Catalinas that survive are worth close to $500,000. The Superduty Tempests built in that Christmas rush exist as believed single survivors. The GTO ran until 1974. It fathered the Chevelle SS, the Roadrunner, the Buick GSX, every mid-size performance car Detroit produced for the next decade. Without the 421 Superduty, the engineering knowledge that built it does not exist. Without that knowledge, the GTO does not happen. Without the GTO, the muscle car era looks completely different. Robert Kennedy never broke GM apart. The antitrust investigation went quiet. The engine the government spooked them into killing became the architecture for the car that defined an era. The government won the battle. Pontiac's engineers won everything else.